disturbance, that's a good word, and increasing biodiversity. Please join me in welcoming him.
In 1948, Paul Mueller was awarded the Nobel Prize for Medicine. Paul Mueller is a Swiss chemist, and he came up with a chemical. It had many factors, right, of which he was particularly interested in the fact that it was extremely good at killing insects, it was very cheap to produce, and it had very low mammalian toxicity. This was a game-changer moment in pest management history, right? This finally wrested control of the environment away from insects and put it into the hands of humans. We could now control when and where insects were going to cause problems in our fields and in our lives. And so we used it. We started spraying it on our soldiers, because insects have killed more soldiers than any bullets or bombs have. Through disease transmission, insects have actually changed the tides of war. We started spraying it into our kitchen cabinets, getting rid of any old creepy crawlies that might be running around in our houses. There's the name of the chemical, right? We started spraying it in the wetlands and into the environment as much as we could. It was an insurance policy. It was an insurance policy against any insect problems that might be ailing you. There was actually a World Health Organization sanctioned program to eradicate mosquitoes from the face of the earth. They were going to spray DDT throughout much of the wetlands on this planet as a way to kill off mosquitoes. It didn't work, by the way. Over time, there were problems because our risk assessment framework is only as good as the questions and as our technology is at the time to assess it, right? We started finding DDT and some of these other early chemistries within the food chain. They started to bioaccumulate. We can still find DDT in fish samples that are collected after it's been banned for around 40 years. When I was growing up, it was a rare occurrence that I would ever see any birds of prey, eagles, hawks, things like that, as I was driving through my homeland of Minnesota. That's because DDT would actually accumulate within these top raptors. It would weaken their eggshells. And so the mothers, when they would sit to roost on their nests and incubate their eggs, they would actually crush their offspring. We're only now starting to recover, but I was just informed by South Dakota wildlife biologists that we're now experiencing a new die-off of raptors that may be related to something else in the environment. No flies on me thanks to DDT. Let's put them on our babies. We still find that, over time, our ability to diagnose different diseases and link them to environmental contaminants, link DDT and some of these other early organochlorides and organophosphates, carbamates to birth defects, breast cancer, diabetes, brain damage. That's just the tip of the iceberg, folks. We still find DDT in human breast tissue. And just to add insult to injury, the pests that we were trying so desperately to kill became resistant to the chemistries that we were putting out there, because the more selection pressure that you put into an organism, especially organisms with high reproductive rates like most insects, the quicker you select for resistance. About what these guys did is they tied it back to the bottom line, and that killing all the insects in your field is actually a really bad business decision. There's only when a pest insect reaches a certain threshold that that pest needs to be controlled. Otherwise, it's a good idea to leave them the hell alone, right? They said that we should be using more than one strategy, things like natural enemies. That's the base of their pest management triad, right? Other tools, things like planting days, things like resistant hybrids. And then, if all of these other things fail, that's when you go in and you use a pesticide as a last-ditch effort to manage pests rather than a first line of defense against pests. In fact, they said that some insects are actually valuable. and we don't want to kill them from our systems. 2005, a new age in pest management. Seeds do not grow this way. We buy them this way, right? It's all in the bag. Don't worry about your pests anymore. As an insurance policy against having pest problems, you can just buy it with insecticide right in it. Insecticidal seed treatments, systemic insecticides. The insecticides that are put onto the seed are taken up by the young developing plant, and they resist any herbivory that may be happening within that plant early in its life. It doesn't make a heck of a lot of sense in some systems, folks. And it's leading to rising insecticide use rates throughout North America. This is data just throughout the Corn Belt. We find that over time, from 1987 to 2002, that's the black bars here. These are various states in the U.S. and major agricultural regions. This is the percentage of the area that was treated with insecticides. In 2007, we found that there had been a spike in every single state in the nation that we have data on. 2012 Ag Census data is out now. Me and my friend Scott Fausti, he's an economist with SDSU, South Dakota State, are looking at that right now, and it's looking like that's even increased beyond what we saw before. This is in spite of the fact that genetically modified crops are out there, which were intended to reduce insecticides within these systems. The question that I ask as I was looking back in 2008, geez Louise, 2009, right around there, I saw that there was a lot being put onto soybeans. And this didn't make a lot of ecological sense to me, right? Why would we be treating soybeans with a systemic insecticide early in the soybean's life? We don't have the soybean aphid, which is really the only economic pest of soybeans present in those fields until later in the season. What are the effects of this decision on the entire insect community if we're putting out neonicotinoids out there? And so it's a 2-year replicated study, 3 treatments. We treated the same variety of soybeans with these other seed treatments, either thiamethoxam or imidacloprid. And then we went out and we looked. We looked for aphid populations, other pests like grasshoppers and bean leaf beetles as well. We looked at populations of predators, and nobody had done that before. And we looked at soybean performance. This is published in the peer-reviewed literature. And this is what we found. This is the pest populations, aphids per plant. Aphids per plant in 2010 and 2009. This is the year, or day of the year, right? We find this looks like one bar, doesn't it? That's because all 3 treatments, we found that soybean aphids were exactly the same densities, regardless of whether or not you had insecticidal seed treatments or not. The other point that I would like to make is that when aphid populations are above the economic injury level, they actually warrant treatment. Down here, we had an order of magnitude fewer aphids in that system, so that even if the seed treatment had killed aphids, there was no need to apply it anyways in that environment, right? They weren't actually threatening you, the economics of that crop. I would also like to point out when this population increase started to happen. It was right around early August. Soybean yields were exactly the same in both years of study, no matter whether they had seed treatments or whether they didn't. So we pulled those plants out of the field and we brought them into the laboratory and we put aphids on them to see how long those plants would actually kill aphids if we allowed if the aphids were there. In June 10th, they killed aphids. In June 24th, they killed aphids. On June 30th, they no longer killed aphids. There was no bioactivity in those plants by the time that the aphids were actually in the field and actually needed to be taken care of. Aphid populations, you'll recall, don't start to peak out until early August, late July. Not only that, but when we looked at predators in these systems, we find that we significantly reduced predator populations that would be there to stop aphids from proliferating within these systems when the aphids do get there. Here's Orius insidiosus, the insidious flower bug. This thing is really cool. It's tackling the soybean aphid right now. It's got these piercing, sucking mouth parts. It's actually sucking the juice right out, and the aphid's trying to defend itself by pumping out this little sticky solution that binds the predator. Super cool stuff. All right. So Orius insidiosus, when we're raising them on Thiamethoxam treated plants, died. Whether or not there was prey, whether or not there wasn't prey, these plants were toxic to the predators of soybean aphids. Sunflowers. I have a graduate student. He was interested in whether or not sunflowers that had neonicotinoid seed treatments on them might be more or less effective at managing pests. Sunflowers is a very intensive insecticide-intensive crop. There's a lot of critters that like to eat the sunflower heads. Sunflowers are also interesting in that they produce, out of their young leaves, small droplets called extrafloral nectar. This is actually part of the plant's immune system. When herbivores are coming along and they start eating the leaves, the plant pumps out more sugar out of its leaves. What comes calling? Ants, lady beetles, all kinds of predators love a sugar meal. It's like Mountain Dew for the insect world, right? And then they stick around, they eat the pests, and then they stick around for a little bit of dessert. What's transported in the phloem? Neonicotinoids are. So by putting seed treatments, are we actually reducing the plant's ability to defend itself? How does these affect insect communities? We tried to buy sunflower seeds that were untreated and then put the treatment on ourselves. The company said that they wouldn't sell it to us. They have no order form. They have no capability of selling you untreated seeds. You have to buy them treated. So they gave it to us. It's nice of them. All right. Thiamethoxams did not reduce insect pests. These were total herbivores. You do see black dots here are untreated. The white dots are insecticide treated with the seed treatment. This is a little peek up here. This is actually aphids. That huge error bars means that there was all kinds of variability. Aphids at this level are not damaging to the plant. They're just little sacks of food. Sunflower weevil is really one of the pests that we were worried about. We actually found that there were a bit more sunflower seed weevils in the insecticide-treated ones. And yields were exactly the same in these two different field trials. One of the field sites was done down at Dakota Lakes Research Station. They did reduce friendly insects out there. This is total predators. Early in the season, when those sunflower seed treatments are most prevalent, we found a reduction. Also out here, we found an increase in predators, probably eating those aphids that we had in our system. And of those predators, ants were particularly attracted and killed by the neonicotinoid. If you don't have ants in your system, or if you do have ants in your system, be very thankful. These are a good thing. You want ants. They're important predators. They're important seed feeders. They cycle nutrients. We want these critters. Are they helping or are they hurting, folks? Are they controlling pest insects in a lot of these systems? That's a great question. Question it. Question it. They do kill natural enemies, and we are charged $10 to $15 an acre, whether or not it happens or not. This pissed off a lot of people when I started to talk about our research. And they said, John, we have data from across the country that's not been published, but we have data from across the country that shows how effective these things are. And so I went through the literature, and all of the public sector, from universities, USDA, ARS, that looked at soybean seed treatments, looked at all of this public sector research, and in every single case, the public sector researchers found that soybean seed treatments did not improve pest management over conventionally applied insecticides. It did not pay, and the EPA now agrees. What a pretty picture, folks. What a pretty picture. All these colors. This is the continental U.S. Sorry, folks, I didn't have one for Canada. Blue is soybeans, green is corn, and red is cotton. This is 3 plant species. 3 plant species, satellite imagery, 30-meter pixels. You can see Chicago. You can see rivers. All 3 of these species are genetically modified, and all 3 of these species are treated with copious amounts of neonicotinoid seed treatments. This is the scale that we are talking about here, folks. We had one of our beekeeper friends slap a patch of hives, beehives, honeybees. Then we collected those honeybees up and we looked inside their stomachs, right, and their guts. And we saw how much fat, how much lipids, and how much carbohydrates they had in their bodies, right? So that we could kind of say what their nutritional status is. Are they big and plump and juicy, or are they kind of nutritionally stressed? This is what we find. As the percentage of cropped land increases, the glycogen, which is storage carbohydrate, protein, and lipids, it decreases. As perennial land increases, glycogen starts to increase. Protein starts to increase. We're nutritionally stressing our honey. We're at a crossroads here. Imagine losing 30 to 50% of your crop every year. That is what we are expecting the honeybee industry, the honey industry to sustain. And if you think that honeybees are the only critters that are out in the environment that are starting to suffer, then you're fooling yourself, okay? We're seeing lower levels of birds, waterfowl, game birds, monarch butterflies, honeybees, other pollinators. These guys are the canaries in the coal mine, folks. And beekeepers are some of the best naturalists that I've ever experienced. They're out there, they're watching, they know what's going on with their bees. We are using insecticides in the environment when they are not necessary. That is a bad business decision. That is costing you money. There are consequences, folks. We've learned about these consequences from history. Why do we have to keep repeating the same mistakes over and over and over again? Why don't we learn? God, that is depressing. It's all climb to the top of the building and jump right off, right? No, it's over. Agriculture is coming crashing to a close, right? No. That is not the message that I want to leave you guys with from this meeting. I want to leave you with a different message, and that there is a better way of farming. If you have pests in your system, then pests are a symptom. They are not the problem. Okay? You have to solve the problem if we want to get beyond this. And the problem is almost entirely a lack of diversity and too much disturbance. When I get up and talk to farmers about insects and how important insects are, the only good bug is a dead bug, right? This is not what I study. This pest-centric mentality towards insect is a problem, because when we realize that insects are the most diverse group of animals on the planet, we realize we can't live without them. And that for every one species of insect pest that is out there, there's actually 1,700 species of insects that are helping us, that are giving us economic benefits that we can take advantage of, folks. We went out. Each of these dots is a corn farm in South Dakota, eastern South Dakota. When we went out, I took a team of about 12 people, and we went out to each of these fields, and we counted the number of pests and the number of all the other insects that we were finding. We found up to 107 species in corn. It's a lot. This is species diversity. This is community evenness. This is pests, the number of pests. 100 pests, 10 pests, 1 pest, 0.1 pests. As we reduce diversity in our fields, we cause pest problems. That is the problem. You can slap as many Band-Aids as you want to, but if those Band-Aids on your pest problem result in diminished diversity, then guess what, folks? You're going to have pest problems again. That's what the pesticide treadmill is all about. But it's not just the number of species, it's also the relative abundances of those species that's important. You don't want a community that has a lot of one species and only a couple of another species. You want a very even community, right? Biodiversity is the solution. We heard before that we need to look back to what used to be there, right? In order to understand what's causing some of these issues that were informed in an image of what used to be there. You guys have heard this message quite a bit at this meeting. But I looked in the literature and we have very little idea within a particular region of actually how much diversity used to be in these systems. So Ryan Schmid, he was my graduate student back a couple of years ago. He's now doing a PhD degree down at Kansas State. Ryan Schmid went out with a group of people and he went into 3 prairies, 3 pastures, and 3 cornfields in Brookings County. And he tried to survey the biodiversity that was out there. He took a vacuum cleaner and he sucked up all of the insects off of the foliage. He took his little pooters, we call them pooters. They're little aspirators, insect suckers, and sucks them all off of the soil surface. And we take soil cores and we find out how many insects were in the soil column and each of these habitats. And then he looked in the vegetation and he counted how many plants were out in each of these different habitats. We found 344 species of arthropods, an occasional pair of identical twins, 75 plant species. They're just out there. 270 species, or specimens. The most of these were parasitic wasps. They look like little gnats, but actually they're predators. They sting insects and lay their eggs inside of them. It's like the movie Alien. They look like little gnats, though, and the rest of them were, a lot of the other ones were other little gnats, the actual little flies that were out there. This is the distribution of species. Corn has about 1/4 to 1/3 of the biodiversity. If biodiversity is producing our pest problems, then reducing biodiversity by 75% in your cornfield from what used to be there is a bad idea. It's a bad idea. Here's that picture again. So how? Why? Why would biodiversity be so important out there? Biodiversity provides services that we are desperately trying to replace with technology within our simplified systems. History has shown us that when you try to replace Mother Nature with technology, she turns around and kicks you in the crotch. Every single time. Every single time. Predation is one such service that biodiversity provides. Here we go. Predation and managing a pest. Ecologists have actually kicked this around quite a bit. They say, well, if you're increasing predator diversity within your system, well, then what are those predators going to eat? Those predators are going to eat each other, right? There's so many predators out there, and then you may actually weaken your pest management. But nobody's actually tested it under realistic conditions. So we decided to focus on this little bad boy. The corn rootworm. It's a beetle pest. Lays its eggs at the base of corn plants. Those eggs overwinter, hatch, and then they eat the corn roots, as the name would suggest. Those plants are physiologically damaged, they don't produce as high a yield, and then they gooseneck, they see lodging. It's been recognized for a pest for 100 years. Millions of dollars have been researched on this guy, or spent on research for this little critter. And what we have figured out is that no matter what we throw against the corn rootworm, it chews it up, it spits it out, and then it flips us the bird. I was told when I arrived in South Dakota at the Rootworm Lab, men had been studying this insect for their entire careers. And they told me, John, there is no predators of corn rootworms. If there was predators out there, we would be having no problems with corn rootworms, right? That is not true. We find that root damage ratings here, this is the amount of damage caused by the rootworm. Higher is bad, lower is good. We find that as predation on corn rootworm increases, we find that the root damage is reduced, right? Predation can protect your plants. By looking inside the stomachs of these rootworm or of these predators. I cut off their heads, I cut off their butts, and I tear out their stomachs, and I look inside using PCR. It's a genetic technique looking for rootworm-specific sequences of DNA. We can actually identify which of these predators had been consuming corn rootworms, and it's dozens of predator species have now been identified using this technique. What a great system for studying this question of whether or not increasing predator diversity is important for reducing prey, right, of a particular pest. So we looked in 16 cornfields. We infested with our handy-dandy tractor-mounted corn rootworm egg infester. 3 patches of these rootworms. We went out there, we took the predators out of the soil, we tore out their stomachs. This is a beetle stomach. Surgeons have nothing on steady hands compared to entomologists, folks. And we looked inside the stomachs of 2,000 of these predators using that genetic technique. This is what we found. This is the proportion of a population that were tested positive. And this is the kind of graph that, I mean, ecologists would spend, 3-4 manuscripts just trying to tease out. Oh my God, this one had the highest percentage, but it was only found in one field. This one down here was found in all of the fields, but it has a really low percentage. And this one likes to tickle this one over here, and who the hell knows what's going on over here? My career is made. I say stop, right? I'm trying to say stop. Let's see. I believe we've died. Any help? Oh, there we go. Okay. Because when we focus on individual species within that community, we forget that the community as a whole is a unit, is the functional unit. Because that community changes. It's dynamic. It changes over the 24-hour cycle. It changes over the season. Different species do different things within that community. So, when we look at this, this is the number of community, or the percentage positive of the community that's positive for corn rootworms. You see in all 16 of those fields, we see about 6% were positive, which doesn't sound like a lot, right? It's like, okay, but then you have to understand how this method works. As soon as the predator ingests its food, just like you at lunch, you instantly start to digest that food's DNA, such that you can only detect the prey in the stomach of the predator for around 8 hours or so. So 6% of predators had consumed corn rootworms within the last 8 hours. 6% of 2,000 specimens is not very much, right? But when we do actual density samples of predator communities within cornfields, we find that there's hundreds of thousands, up to 1 billion at Dakota Lakes Research Station per acre. 6% of 1 billion in the last 8 hours, that's a lot of predation that's going on, right? Something we can tap into. So what we looked at, these are the 16 fields. This is predator abundance. This is frequency of predation. As predators become more abundant in those fields, they rely more heavily on corn rootworms as prey. As more species of predators are found in those fields, they rely more heavily on corn rootworms as prey. Why would that be? Why would a predator community, when it became more abundant and more diverse, why would it rely more on this focal pest? That doesn't make any sense, right? We've all gotten one of these before. The orange cream is always the last damn chocolate in that box. Usually it has a bite out of it and been put back in. Corn rootworms are the orange creams of the pest world. As predators become more abundant and more diverse, they're eating the easy prey first and leaving those orange creams for the last, right? And I have data to show it. Here it is right now. This is a movie. This is a corn rootworm larva. This is my big burly predator. She comes along. She takes a bite. She starts freaking out. This is what my kids do when I serve lasagna. 100 years we've been studying this pest, and nobody had discovered that its blood was toxic to predators. It instantly coagulates on predator mouth parts, and there's a chemical repellent in it that stops other predators from eating it. Rootworm larvae are distasteful. Nothing likes eating them, or at least certain components of the result, you would expect then that sucking predators do not think of rootworms as the orange creams, right? And so they shouldn't have a response like a chewing predator might. Diversity and abundance shouldn't affect the sucking predators so much. And of course, that's exactly what we see. I wouldn't have brought it up if it didn't actually happen that way. Sucking predators, as the diversity of suckers go up, we see that the proportion positive stays about the same. Flat line, right? But with the chewers, as we diversify that chewing community, as we saturate it with different niches, we're actually finding that they rely more heavily on rootworms. Biodiversity works in this way, right? In ways that we can't always see, right? It's a complicated process. We need to saturate predator communities in order to force them to eat some of these distasteful prey. And guess what? Most of your prey have these anti-predator defenses. That's why they are pests, right? That is why they are pests. Because they are able to overcome a lot of these natural natural ways of resisting them. So, although we have very high densities of predators within our fields, we still need to get more in there in order to mimic these natural systems more, where they were functioning more healthily. Biological networks. When you tug on one little strand, you find that it's connected to everything else in that system, don't you? That is a truth, and we are connected to that system as well. Folks, we need a humbler approach to pest management in this country, in my country as well. We need to take a step back and realize that what pests really are is a symptom rather than the problem itself. We need to understand how these insect communities used to function within natural systems, where there are very few pest outbreaks that occur, right? And we need to reincorporate these processes back into our agroecosystems in order to make them work. You've learned a lot of the agronomic tools to do that, right? No-till, minimal till, for those of you who are really frightened of no-till. Diversity, lengthen your crop rotations. Get cover crops into the mix. If rye is your gateway drug to getting cover crops into your rotation, I'll take it. We need to diversify these cover mixes even more, right? Perenniality in your system. Using field margins. Don't mow your field margins. Don't hay your field margins. Use your field margins as a tool. You can use these as a tool for conserving beneficial species that spill over into your cropland and save you money. Coexist. The question is not, can we conserve biodiversity and use biodiversity while producing crops? The question is, what's going to happen if we don't? 40% of the terrestrial land surface of this planet is agroecosystems. If we're not involving farmers in ways to use cropland as a tool for conserving species while also maintaining profitability, then man, we've missed a really important opportunity, folks. And with that, many people to thank. I currently have the greatest research team on the planet. I would not be here if it was not for these wonderful and exciting young scientists that makes coming to work every day so much fun. Dwayne and a number of other colleagues have helped over the years. 80 honey farms provided the beehives for that work. Lots and lots of undergraduates and technical help, funding. There you have it. And I've got about 9 minutes that you guys can throw rotten vegetables at me.